Chapter 2 of Perspective Drawing is all about understanding perspective drawing, understanding all the previous principles we went over in Chapter 1, and understanding where and what and why we use them. In this chapter, we will build upon what we learned so far and add more complex ideas and methods on top of what we know so far. So the first half of Chapter 2 will be all about advanced methods and techniques to draw more complex objects in perspective, while the second half of Chapter 2 will be about drawing in perspective, using reference but not copying what we see, more like understanding what we see and drawing the object in perspective in different perspective type, different view, different orientation, different scale, and location. So let's go over some of the lessons we will talk about in this chapter. We will talk first about different grid types that we can draw to make our life a bit easier. We talked before about grid stars, and now we will go over a few more grid types. We will then go over subdividing an ellipse in different ways. We will talk about more advanced object manipulation tools like morphing, tapering, twisting, bending, and using lathe to draw rounded objects. Then we move on to a very complicated object, drawing curves and organic shapes in perspective using measurements. Most of these techniques are explained in details in Scott Robertson's book, so we will try to go over it step by step and try to do as many examples as possible, including some examples shown in his book, just to make things a bit easier for beginners. Some of the things we will talk about in this subject is mirroring curves, measuring angles, drawing slopes in different levels, and referencing objects on them. Then we go back to drawing from projection planes, but this time we will make it a bit harder and draw more complicated shapes. Then we move up a level and draw organic shapes using the same 2D projection plans. Then we will do something fun afterward, which is assembling and exploding objects in perspective. First we split objects in half in different views, and then layer them up side by side or on top of each other to show the internal work of different tools and devices, and always going from simple objects first all the way to complex ones. After that, we go back to drawing simple objects from projection plans, but this time we won't draw it in a default 2-point perspective. We will draw them first on a 1, 2, and 3-point perspective, and then start drawing them from different views. This is where we start to modify the reference photo, just like we did at the end of Chapter 1. We are no longer copying here. We are understanding the object, then we are drawing it as we see fit. After that, we start increasing the difficulty level with more complex shapes drawn in different perspective types and orientations. Then we start drawing props in the same way using projection plans like we did before. Then we finally let go of technical drawing altogether and start drawing props in different orientations and perspective type using freehand while applying all perspective principles at the same time. We do the same for larger, more complicated props and start adding some assemblies like explosion technique as well. We draw some furniture next and more organic props afterward in different orientations as well. We then add more complexity to the moving, rotating, and scaling exercise that we did in Chapter 1 by designing a table of props using many different reference photos. After that, we talk about interior design and how we build up interiors using perspective drawing. Once we do that, we start adding some furniture to that house using the same techniques we did for arranging props on a table we did earlier. Then we talk about tools and techniques in drawing interior design like measuring, doors, windows, different ceiling types, different floor levels, exterior items, and much more. Finally, we take a little detour to talk about the use of 3D software to make your life a bit easier with perspective drawing, something we will talk about even more in Chapter 3. The final part of Chapter 2 is simply drawing different objects using everything we learned so far. So we will start with drawing some architecture elements in different perspective views like wall design, columns, windows, balconies, oriental towers, and domes. Then we start converting 2D interior shots into 3D perspective. After that, we draw some medieval building using different projections. Next, we move on to vehicles and start drawing more complex shapes in 3D from 2D projections. We draw different toy trucks in different orientations. Then we draw real bikes and real cars afterward using both technical and freehand methods. After that, we will look into different ways to draw cars from elevations and sections. We use different 3D reference to draw the basic shapes of a car step by step, from blocks with wheels to a curved shape in different views and orientation. We draw a few vehicle elements in the lesson after that, like different wheels, car mirror, and use some line weight and line quality to make them look cool. We draw more vehicles next, using even more different techniques and choose some interesting designs like retro cars. Finally, we draw trucks and other heavy machinery in different orientations using full-on freehand stuff. Just so this intro doesn't go for too long, I will just tell you about the rest of the chapter all at once. We will cover after vehicles more organic shapes like insects, animals, characters, and landscape, using all the same techniques as we did with props and vehicles. First understanding what we see in the reference photo, and then drawing it in different perspective, different orientation, and different composition, the way we want it, not the way it is in the reference photo. Once we finish all the subjects at hand, we go over the whole chapter with more exercises like we did in the previous chapter, and end chapter 2 on a bang, just like we did with chapter 1. After that, we move on to the most interesting part of this mini-series and start creating amazing things in chapter 3, but that will be later after we finish chapter 2. For now, let's start chapter 2 with the first lesson. We're gonna start with an easy lesson for the first video and talk about drawing different grids in perspective and dividing an ellipse in different ways. In the previous chapter, we saw how we can divide and measure a rectangle back toward the vanishing point, but here is a quicker way to do it. We draw the first edge and connect it back to the vanishing point. We are using 1-point perspective here, so we end up with this shape. Now let's draw a 45-degree line from the corner of that edge all the way to the horizon line. Let's connect the first intersection point with the perspective line and make our first rectangle. Now before we had to find the center and connect it to the vanishing point, then connect from one corner to the center point of the far edge, and wherever it hits, that would be the next duplication. But we can shortcut all this work by just connecting the new corner we made toward the first reference point we had on the horizon line to get the next rectangle. We connect the far edge again and connect the corner back toward the same point, over and over, and we get our duplication done much faster. If you want to check your work, we can do the longer method, and we will see that we get the exact same result. So this is just a faster way to do it with much less line work. Let's do another one in different angle and see how it goes. First we draw the edge, then we draw the 45 degrees line to the opposite side since we are at an angle here. Then we connect the far edge at the intersection, and then the next one, and then the next one, all the way to the vanishing point. We can recheck again and we will get the same result. Let's now do a 2-point perspective rectangle and see how we can use the same method to draw a quick grid. Let's draw the rectangle first and then connect from one corner to the other all the way to the horizon line. Here the angle won't be at 45 degrees since it's a 2-point perspective unless you use a 60-degree cone of vision connected to a stationary point. But since this isn't exactly an exact 60-degree scene, we can just connect the corners all the way to the horizon line and mark that point on it. From that point we can connect it back toward the new edge corner and get our new duplication. Then we connect that edge to the other vanishing point to close up the rectangle. We do this from one side over and over a few times to get few rectangles. Then we do the same on the other side to get our grid. We can check our work again by finding the center, connect it to the vanishing point, and connect the corner to the center of the far edge to get the same exact rectangle. We can check the other side as well with the same result. Let's now remove all these lines and draw the final grid. And here it is, done in a much faster way. Let's even go faster and draw a grid right away without any horizon line or vanishing point. Here I start with a vertical line and connect it to the vanishing point outside my canvas. Make sure there is a slight convergence in the lines so that you don't end up with an isometric view. Let's set the edge of this grid on both sides. You can draw one side, then move it to the other side through a horizontal line. Now let's divide our grid on the main vertical line and move the same divisions on both edges. Now we connect between all these points all the way out from both sides. I copy the lines from one side to the other just to speed things up, but if you want to be 100% accurate, take your time here. Now that we connected all the lines, I had the vertical lines and ended up with a very nice and quick grid. We can check our work again and find the center of each rectangle and connect it to the vanishing point, outside the canvas of course, and see that we are 99% correct here. Me rushing the lines a little bit gave this little inaccuracy in the lines, but you can still use this grid to draw quick objects in perspective without drawing every rectangle on it. This is basically a version of the grid style that we talked about in chapter 1. You can finally choose a certain section of the grid and make it your new canvas and start drawing your scene on it. Let's go up a level and draw a 3D grid. We start with the first rectangle and connect it to both vanishing points. We then connect the corners all the way to the horizon line and mark our point there. From it we can start connecting the new corners on both sides of the rectangle and then to the vanishing points to create row of the grid from both sides. By doing that, we end up with the whole grid done in a faster way. Let's draw it in a better line quality so we can remove all these perspective lines afterward. Now to build the vertical grid, we need to know how high the initial rectangle will be. To get that, we can draw a horizontal line from the initial rectangle and mark where the point we got on the horizon line interacts with the end of that edge. This distance is the length of the edge. Now let's rotate it 90 degrees and we get the same length vertically. We connect it back to the vanishing point and mark where it will be at the vertical lines there. That's our height. From it, we connected the other vanishing point and get the whole row height. Now we can duplicate it vertically as much as we need the grid to be. Now let's connect these points to the opposite vanishing point to get the whole column and rows of that edge of the grid. We do the same to the other side to get the same height and connect it to the opposite vanishing point using the grid we have already on the other side. To section the rows, we can use the ground grid and draw the lines vertically from it toward the rows up there. And there it is, a whole 3D grid done quickly. Now we can start drawing our scene on it, knowing that following this grid will always result in a correct drawing. Now what if you want to draw a grid all over the scene in one point perspective? Easy. We start first with the rectangle in the middle by connecting two lines from the vanishing point and two horizontal lines. Now we have the rectangle, we do what we did before and connect the corners from one side all the way to the horizon line. Now we got our first reference point from one side, we can do the same to the other corner. Now all we have to do is to connect both points to the new corners we get from both sides. Now that we have a full row, pay attention to these intersection lines from the reference point toward the perspective lines. We learned before that these diagonal lines can divide the space equally, so let's use them. From these intersection points I draw a horizontal line to get rows and rows of the grid in one click. Now of course if you took your time and did better job than I did here in connecting the lines before, you would get all these points aligned perfectly. You can keep going all the way to the bottom using all the lines we have already without doing any extra work. And just like that, we get a huge grid from the foreground all the way to the background. Let's do it with better line quality. And here it is, done in few minutes, without all the calculations we did before. You can keep going and do it vertically like before, and make yourself a 3D grid. You can also continue to the left, to the right, or to the back and front, all the way to cover the entire scene. With this easy method, you can do it all in 5 or less minutes. With that, this was just a quick lesson on grids, just to keep in mind if you need to use them as background for your work. But before finishing up the lesson, I want to go over one thing I quickly talked about in the last video of chapter 1, which is dividing an ellipse in perspective. We divided ellipses before, but to a certain degree. In this method, you can divide your ellipse as much as you want. So let's quickly go over it before ending this lesson. So let's divide these ellipses. First, I draw the diagonal and cross lines all around. Next, I connect in between the cross line points. With that, I end up with 4 smaller rectangles with 4 centers. So let's connect in between these centers in both ways, vertically and horizontally. Now we got 16 smaller rectangles. Pay attention to this step. Connect in between each corner of the larger rectangle and the closest point around the 2 nearest edges. Now do the same for all 4 corners. Now this step might be a bit tricky, but mark the points you got on the circle, but only the ones coming from that corner. So in the first corner you can see 4 lines cutting through the ellipse, but only 2 of them are coming from the corner closest to that edge of the circle. And these are the ones you need to mark, not the other ones. We do the same for all 4 corners. We add the intersection points from the cross lines as well. And just like that we end up with 12 different points. Let's connect in between them with straight lines. Now if we hide the construction work, we see our ellipse is divided into 12 equal points. Now let's do that again for the second ellipse. Connecting the corners and cross lines first, then connecting the points between the cross lines, and then the centers of the new rectangles we created toward the vanishing points. Since this is a one-point perspective, we can draw horizontal lines to connect the centers and get our 16 boxes. Let's connect the corners now to the closest edge points and mark the points on the ellipse. You can zoom in if things got a bit confusing. Now that we have the points, we can connect in between them to get our 12 divisions. Now there is a quicker way to get the same result, by dividing the bottom edge into 4 equal parts, and then drawing vertical lines from these points. We divide the vertical lines to 4 equal parts as well, and we reach the same 16 equal squares as before. Now we do the same thing as before and connect the corner to the closest points on the opposite edge and get our divisions. Notice that the vertical and perspective lines hit the same point we connected from the corners, and we can use that to speed things up even more. So let's do that. Let's draw the diagonals and cross lines and connect in between the cross lines to get our 4 smaller rectangles. Now we can connect these centers to get our 16 rectangles in between. Now, as we saw before, these lines hit the same exact location as the corner lines. So let's skip that step and draw these intersection points right away. As you can see, they end up with the same result, but much faster. So let's connect the lines and get our divisions. As you can see, many ways to reach the same conclusion. Now what if we want more than just 12 divisions? Well, now we can use projection to get as many divisions as we want. For this orientation, we use the horizontal projection for the ellipse to project the ellipse with the same size in between the top and bottom limits. And then we can divide it and project it toward the projection line and then to the main ellipse. Here divisions are much easier to do, since there is no perspective convergence in it. So we can simply draw diagonals, then vertical and horizontal lines to get the first 8 divisions. Then we start drawing a line every 15 degrees to get more divisions. You can also do every 10 or every 5 or more to get even more divisions. Be careful with the lines here, because even the smallest mistake will carry on to your main ellipse, so take your time here. Once I got the divisions, I mark the intersection points with the ellipse all around. Then I connect these points horizontally toward the projection line. These are the location of the divisions on the ellipse. Now we can project them using the vanishing point all the way to the main ellipse. Again, be very careful with the lines here, or you will see it in your divisions. Now to draw the divisions on our ellipse, we need to find the center. So let's draw the diagonals and make sure they hit the points where the diagonals hit on the projection center. Now that we have the center, let's get the vertical cross lines to make things a bit easier. Now take your time and connect the points we projected around the circle and make sure they all meet at the center of the circle and the points on the ellipse at the same time. And with that, we got 24 equal divisions on our ellipse in perspective. You can go with 36, 48, and as many as you want using this method. For this orientation in the z-axis, we do the projection vertically aligned with the axis. We do the same process here. Divide the ellipse equally, mark the points on the ellipse, project these points toward the projection line, and then all the way to the vanishing point. Then we find the center of our ellipse and the cross lines. The rest is connecting the lines in between to get the rest of the divisions. Again, remember to take your time here or you will end up with some misalignment like I'm getting here. And there it is, many methods to divide the ellipse in perspective. Some are easier, some are faster, and some are more accurate, but all lead to the same goal. Alright, this concludes the first lesson of chapter 2. We are starting a bit easy and slow before we ramp up the difficulty with tricky exercises and lessons later on. In the next lesson, we will continue to modify the basic shapes using morphing tools like tapering, bending, twisting, and lathe. These are advanced tools to add to our basic ones we learned about in chapter 1. This will be a fun lesson to do. See you there. If you like this lesson, feel free to leave a like. If you have any question, leave it down in the comment section and I will do my best to answer it as soon as possible. To stay notified of future lessons, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next lesson.